Hey everybody, Leela Games just raised a $10 million Series A financing with investors including Rainfall, Bitcraft, Galaxy Interactive, Sequoia India, and Krafton. We also have a number of big time angels jumping in, like Ryan Wyatt, who was a former head of YouTube Gaming, currently CEO of Polygon, Thomas Vu, who was former chief creative at Riot, also famous for being a producer on the Netflix series Arcane, Tanay Tayal, who is a godfather of the Indian gaming industry and co-founder and CEO of Moonfrog, which was recently acquired by Stillfront. So in today's discussion, we're going to be talking about game studio fundraising and specifically Series A funding. And having raised a Series A, I actually don't even know what that means still, but we'll talk about lessons, best practices, mistakes based on my experience with this current financing round. And here with me to discuss this topic, we have two of our investors, Jasper Brand from Bitcraft and Michael Fan from Galaxy Interactive. Both of these companies were in our seed round and again participated in our Series A. Thanks again for that, guys. And also our lead legal counsel for Leela, who actually yelled at me a lot for screwing up so much on this financing round. And we can get into some of the reasons why and some of the mistakes I made, but we have Hans Kim from Mayfield Venture Law. Welcome, guys.
Hey, great to be here.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
So I thought we could start with your perspectives on where we are right now in terms of the general investment environment and the climate. So we've had in the public markets, we've had a bit of a correction, and the word on the street is that, we're kind of hearing two things, right? That based upon the correction in the public markets, that, valuations are going down in private markets. But we're also hearing that, while it's easy to raise seed round funding, that Series A may be getting tougher. But also at the same time, I know Bitcraft and Galaxy, you guys have raised big funds recently. So maybe there's a large supply of capital out there to fund gaming investments. So maybe we could start there. Jasper and Michael, what do you guys think in terms of the current funding environment? How would you characterize that for entrepreneurs out there trying to raise money? Maybe starting with you, Jasper?
Sure. So I think it's not big news that there's been more capital available than ever, and overall there's been a great shift towards venture funding as a founders market, whereas before it was a VC market with multiple founders competing for VC dollars. So capital is certainly not a true differentiator anymore, and that's something that's exciting both for Michael and for us at Bitcraft, sector-focused investors, where you certainly get to take an edge and get to help founders in a deeper way. But overall, while public market valuations have come down, multiples on future revenues have stayed somewhat consistent in the game space. And dry powder in venture capital has never been bigger. And usually when there's a market correction, even a big financial crisis, you only see that in the dry powder for venture dollars, basically like 2 to 3 years after that. So I think for the early stage market, valuations will still stay at an elevated level where they've moved to over the past few years, with all of the crazy seed-focused funds you have available. A number of funding rounds, number of capital invested has grown rapidly. But that capital can probably also be put to good use nowadays with increasing salaries, where you guys might have a specific edge with your presence in India. But overall, you still need to make dilution work for companies and founders, so everything stays at a fair balance. And on the whole, you get to raise your Series A probably with less proof points than it was 2 to 3, maybe 5 years ago. So I think overall, the Series A funding market is more active than ever, will stay more active than ever. And on the game side, we see incredibly talented teams spinning out of Blizzard, Riot, and other studios. Similarly, on the mobile side, who are taking on ambitious new projects. And you have a pretty interesting dynamic with publishers from across the globe getting active. at the early stages, sometimes even getting involved at seed or Series A's. Um, and not just looking for publishing deals anymore, but really trying to get access to some of the most talented teams that were not part of their overall umbrella before.
Michael, what about you? And maybe you could also speak to like the number of deals you're doing. Is it more or less? And are you paying more or less? And then seed versus Series A.
Long term, I'm very positive because I try to think about what are the things that don't change. And one thing that doesn't change is entertainment. No matter if the economy is good or bad, people seek entertainment. No matter you are in a peaceful environment or war environment, people will seek for entertainment, right? Seek entertainment. And within the entertainment, video game is the biggest entertainment industry in the history of entertainment. And it's probably not going to change because a video game is also at the same time the cheapest entertainment possible, right? You spend $11 for a 2-hour movie in San Francisco, you spend the same amount of money at Best Buy or GameStop on discount. You can probably buy 1 or 2 games, and you can probably spend 200 hours playing a free-to-play game. So this is the reason long term I'm still very, very bullish on the industry itself. Now, in the short term, I think there are things that are changing. The first thing is people are, let's face it, making more and more money. There are many, many ways of making more and more money. For example, blockchain, there are a lot of almost kids, right, who are making millions of dollars. What does it mean for them? It means that now they can challenge the angel investors. They are investors. Where do they invest? If you have money and you want to invest and you don't have a lot of experience with investment or even a lot of experience in any industry, what do? You invest in things that are very obvious. What is obvious? Video games is very obvious because anybody at least can claim that they understand the content, they can play the content. Of course, it doesn't mean that you're a good investor, but at least you understand why you like it. So what does it mean now? It means that anyone or a lot of people can look at the content and say, this is good. I have money. Let me put some money in. So that will drive the price up. So if the price is up for a professional investor, what do? We need to find opportunities where the price are down or relatively not that nuts. So there are 2 ways we can do this. We can either go early stage because what we have that these non-professional investors have is the resource, the network, right? We can have better sourcing. We hear about deals before, we hear about deals earlier than these non-professional investors, or we can go deeper because we have the platform, because some of us have worked in the industry for many years. We understand how it works, so we can go deeper. We can find the opportunities that are not obvious. But going deeper is very hard. Hard means complex. Complex means a lot of money, means a lot of cost. So this is also why it's much easier, it's much better in a way to go earlier. Now here's the problem. If every single investor goes earlier, what happens? Then early stage company have their price going up. This is why nowadays you are seeing seed deals that are made at a price of Series A or sometimes even Series B. It's just crazy. So this is why in the short term, I think what we're going to see is the price. Actually, what we are seeing now compared to 2021 is price are getting stabilized a little bit because people start to figure out that, oh my God, these prices are crazy. I do believe that the price might come down, especially when some of the early bets, like what I typically call the PowerPoint bet, right? You literally just spend a lot of money investing in a PowerPoint project. And these projects, some of them are actually not going to meet the market. Some of them are going to fail. And that is going to drive a lot of fear from investors who are going to be a little bit more cautious with our money. So in the short term, maybe in the next 12, 18 months, we might have going to see is some of the price going down or some of the price at least stabilizing. So that's my current read, which honestly is not a bad thing. So the real question now is, what do you do as a founder, right? And my advice to every founder is really easy. Don't care. It doesn't matter how the market is thinking, how speculators are thinking, how investors are thinking. What you should really be doing is just do a good job. Because here's why. If you are so good, you will not be ignored. If you're so good and the market is hot, you are just going to be even hotter. You are going to have an even better price. But if you're good and the market is, you are in a bear market, the investors are always going to find ways to allocate the money. But if you are in a bear market and everybody is fearing, is they don't want to spend their money on random stuff, they are going to concentrate their money on the big deal, on the real good one. So if you're doing a good job, everybody's just going to look for you anyway.
Got it. And Hans, I know you've been doing a bunch of deals. What are you seeing in terms of like volumes and, like the size of deals and things like that?
Yeah, it's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. We are really in the renaissance for entrepreneurs. There's a lot of money out there. Investors are looking for good people, talent to back, especially in the game industry. So the game industry is so dependent upon creativity and technical know-how, and really the money that's going in to fund these creative persons is fantastic, and it allows these individuals who might otherwise have stayed at these large video game companies to go out and explore on their own and to start their own company. So not only do you have the money, but you also have the talent that's willing to go out there and take a risk. This is all part of the ecosystem, and that's why it's great to have more and more investors, more venture capital firms, and more funding. Now, in terms of the valuations, and everybody's complaining about these valuations are going up, 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 it's because of the success of these entrepreneurs, right? People realize now that a small creative technical team can come up with a hit game and overnight become worth billions of dollars. So because of that, investors are shifting their funds to these early stage companies, and they realize they need to get there early, because if they get there too late, if they get there after the game is released, it's too late, right? The game's hit, it's bringing lots of money. Founders don't need to raise capital, and so it's a really a challenging time for investors, because they have to really look for the talent and look for the persons who can execute as well. So it's talent, execution, technical skill. Those are the things that I'm seeing. I'm seeing the smart investors finding that talent and funding successful companies.
Right. And to the point you made, Michael, like there does seem to be some ecosystem changes. You're saying that there are some investors looking earlier stage. We've also seen in the gaming industry, massive amount of M&A in the mid-tier market. And so even like on the corporate side, there have been a lot of corporate entities kind of looking earlier and earlier as well. And we've, at Lila, we spoke to a few companies that we typically didn't think would be interested in funding or being interested in other kinds of discussions. But, we actually had about 3 discussions around that at our stage, and we got nothing, right? So that was very surprising. And to your point, there's more money out there. And as money's shifting around, I wanted to talk about this notion of seed versus Series A. And Jasper, when we initially started going out for this current fundraising round, we had described it as a pre-Series A. Ultimately, we called it a Series A. I still don't even know what a Series A is. So could you guys Hans, what technically should a Series A be? And then Jasper and Michael, if you guys could tell us how you guys define it, that'd be great, because I just know we raised some money, but I still don't even know what quite to call it. Hans?
Yeah, I mean, the term Series A has really changed over the years. So I've been doing financings for over a dozen years, and just in that short time, it really has changed. So, but in today's market, what we call Series Seed, right, used to be the old Series A. So Series A has shifted up, and it really indicates several things. One, product market fit, right, and traction, right? So that's kind of what you would see in a traditional company, right? But even in today's market, what's happening is that these companies are getting funded earlier and earlier. So even at what they call a Series A might not fit those sort of traditional definitions of Series A. And certainly your company, right? Even pre-product, right? You're raising a Series A before you even launch a product. So I don't know if you really need to get stuck on the term Series A.
Okay.
I think Series A these days might mean more in terms of how much you're raising, right? These days, a Series A might be anywhere from 10 to 20 million raise, right, for 25% of the company. I mean, I'll let the
Jasper, Michael?
investors sort of jump in
Go
and,
ahead.
and give their opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with Hans. The seed has become the new Series A in a way. Previously, seed rounds were pretty small. You really had a team and a deck, and for your Series A, then you got to partly still fund product development. Putting a team together, you didn't really have that much traction, and nowadays kind of so how early stage funding is supposed to work, because or it was supposed to work in seeded Series A, is more like a step function, right? You had a clear proof point to raise on, and now it's a bit like at your Series A you launch your product in a way, and it is your inflection point already. And I mean, for us on the game studio side, it is probably shifted more broadly, or it has not fully made that transition. While you get to test earlier than it used to be the case for box model releases and whatnot. In free to play, if you have ambitious AAA projects, you still have a lot of upfront financing for these companies, and sometimes it takes 20 million or so or more to actually launch a product and put it into players' hand, even in early access. So for me, how I think about it, in how this de-risking step function works, is at the seed, you very frequently have really a core team of founders and a deck and an idea for a game. Sometimes maybe a very initial combat prototype or whatever. And then for the Series A, you really have put the strong core team in place of 10, 15, 20, maybe even 30 people. That shows your ability to hire top tier talent, to build a functioning culture, strong organization. And you have made some strides on putting that initial vision for an audience need into practice. You have some form of playable prototype, some eye candy. You can show something that runs in the engine, maybe something you can playtest depending on the game. But you're still not, at that inflection point where you would be in traditional tech venture, where you have super scalable metrics for a B2B SaaS tech business or something like that. So it's still not as clear and crisp, and you don't have hard proof points most of the times. On the mobile side, especially on the casual side, you get metrics much earlier, because funding for development and shipping things is much quicker, and you can ship things in Canada or the Philippines or wherever, and find some initial validation. But for games like ours at Lila, it's a lot about building some initial friends and family playtests, and then some core Discord communities with maybe 100, 200, 300 people, where you get your first feedback. But it's not at scale. So the proof points for most game studio investments at Series A you have are still fairly qualitative, and often still fairly based on a potential audience need.
I would say that seed, you have something to tell, and A, you have something to show. From an investor standpoint, when we talk to teams raising seed money, what we really focus on is, what is the team? What is the vision? And we ask ourselves really this question of, do we actually believe this is the team, the right team to build this? And how much do we believe they can execute to actually build it? And then when we talk to Series A companies, it's all about, what do you have to show? All right, the team, the story, everything is very important still. But at this point, especially for the money you are asking, show us something. This is where we do a lot of, for example, for more technical company, we do code review. For if you're building an online game, we probably want to understand your infrastructure, your backend live services. Do we have even plans for this? As Jasper mentioned, we really expect you to at least have like a first slice that we can test, that we can try, that we can see. And I think this the way I'm really thinking about the difference between seed and A is that, like, are you telling me something or you're showing me something? And then when we make investment in A, I think the questions we ask ourselves is, okay, we now see that you can build it, at least a first slice. Can it scale? Can it become venture scale? That's jargon that we use. Can it be very, very big, for example, right? One thing that is very important for especially founders in video games to understand that unlike publishers, as a VC, we do not make money on your revenue. We don't take a cut. Of course, it's very, very important for us that your game is successful, but fundamentally, we make money when your company exits. So another thing to consider when you're raising money is to tell us the story of your company and not necessarily only the game, right? So when you come to seed and A, I think one of the biggest difference is at seed, you really don't have that much to tell about your company. A lot of people tell about their company culture, which is a great thing, but that's it, right? But when it comes to A, we expect you to have already hired some people, to already have some maybe partnership even established. So you have more of a company story now to tell.
Okay. And maybe now shifting the discussion to different models of opportunity. I think it might be instructive, especially for other companies, maybe in like emerging markets like Turkey or China or other places like that. And that's kind of the model that we're following, right? Which is to try and build an organization out of India in emerging markets. But I would probably say that another model that I think is more popular, Jasper, you mentioned like the ex-Blizzard, ex-Riot guys. I see a bunch of companies getting funded from folks who are kind of jumping out of Blizzard, jumping out of Riot and starting companies. But can you guys talk to like maybe the different models that you're seeing in terms of, or different kind of paradigms of investment that you're seeing in terms of what you guys are funding today? And do you see any kind of patterns like that? And then maybe specifically, if you know of other companies following our model in terms of building out in like an emerging market, it'd be great to hear. And again, maybe starting with you, Jasper.
Sure. I think overall, the geography is split, and companies that can emerge from there are like their own little microcosms and ecosystems almost. So while Unity was born in Denmark initially and was a hidden gem there, or the initial studios in the Nordics, or maybe Peak in Turkey, all of these companies then give rise to a broader ecosystem of trained developers who have experienced what it's like to be scrappy, build something, iterate, have that mindset. But also venture funding attention externally comes into the space. And you have entrepreneurs who themselves angel fund new companies that spin out of their companies. You've seen that in all of these markets. And now when we look towards India, India had a rapidly growing kind of consumer and tech funding share. I think it was at like 40% in 2009, and it's like 80% in 2020. So you still need to build that fundamental infrastructure in the first place. And in last year, they had 40 unicorns. In the year before, they had 10 new unicorns. And now only one or two of those have been games with Dream 11 and Mobile Premier League, not necessarily traditional game studios yet, even if you think about it that way. But still, the games and entertainment funding in India has grown over 10x compared to the last 7, 8, 9 years. And there is growing attention in the space. Even your co-founder Avinash at June Gaming, he co-founded an exciting shooter company in the space, and those are kind of the initial first steps where from these experiences people are ready to build something exciting and new. And the number one success indicator for a future successful startup is if a team has scaled a product and a company to 10 million ARR or $50 million exit or something along those lines. So having these guys who have been part of these transformational shifts is what you perhaps see with teams spinning out of Blizzard and Riot as well, from the free-to-play wave in the Western markets, that you have perhaps on the mobile side, especially in Turkey, in the Nordics, perhaps when it comes to social casino in Israel as well. So overall, I think there are some pretty cool dynamics, and India is probably the market that's next up on the rise with a fairly strong mobile focus. And then if you look into other markets, for instance, like LATAM, they have some very strong affinity to games, and they have some pretty broad gamer demographics. But if you look at the whole funding and venture environment there, they're probably another 7 to 10 years behind India at this point. And then if you're, want to go very broad and think about connecting the last billion in Africa, there you have much deeper issues when it comes to hardware and connectivity and so on, which will probably take even longer. But these hidden gems, as the first studios, really coming out of India, will be powerful to shape a broader ecosystem, like has happened in the Nordics and is now happening in Turkey and Israel already. So definitely something very exciting, and really looking forward to the first, big LATAM one that will start shaping the industry as well.
I would start by saying that there's a misconception, I think, that somehow if you have been a very successful person in one of the very big publisher or studios, you should be a very successful content/studio entrepreneur. That is not true. When you work in one of this, especially large organization, if you have a problem, you click on a button, you have an intern. When you are a founder, you have a problem, you click on a button, you have 20 other problems. Being a founder in a startup is so damn hard. It takes way more than just knowing how to build a game. Especially Joe, for example, you are CEO, and if I ask you, what do you do on a daily basis, probably very little has to do with building the game. And that is unfortunate, but that is the truth. So that is the first, I think, important thing that people have to understand. I think it takes a lot of humility to be a very good founder. And if today you are at Riot, Blizzard, Activision, EA, whatever, and you really want to build something, you have to understand there's a huge difference between building a game and building a company. So that's the preface. Now, to answer your question, I would say that international markets are, of course, very interesting for us. I think, but when we say international market, I think there are two ways of looking at that. International market as we go there for the consumers, or international market for the talent. China, for example, I think is a very interesting case, because in the last 10 years now, China was the market for the consumers, right? We go there because there are a lot of people, there are a lot of wallets, and this is how we make money. I think over the last few years, what we're saying is using talent from China for the international market. Companies like miHoYo, for example, building Genshin Impact, it's a very international game. The way we look at the things at Galaxy is we are actually more interested in the second category, where we can go to find the next talents, the next entrepreneurs having a structural advantage to build games internationally. China is very interesting for us, especially now with the crackdown. So a lot of these very, very good studios that are making tons of money in China suddenly have some problem. It's harder now for them to publish a game in China. So they need to go elsewhere. Where do they go? How do they go there? And what is very interesting for us is some of their studios will actually need help to penetrate international markets. Just the language barrier, for example, is a lot of complexity. And I think that is where we see a lot of opportunities. Jasper mentioned Latin America, another really good market for that. For decades, American companies, especially American tech companies, have been outsourcing in Latin America. They are also in the same time zone as the USA. So that just makes collaboration very, very easy. And they learned over the last decade the different traits and the different skills to be at least on par with a technology company in the US. So the question is, what new do they have to offer? If we invest over there, do they have teams that can build games that are never going to be built in the US from a culture standpoint? And are they going to build games that are much cheaper than building here, for example, in the Silicon Valley? So these are the questions we ask ourselves. And then I think there's another thing that we want to explore is I would say almost on the business model. Depends on your environment. You are either very lazy and you just do whatever everybody's doing, or you actually have to push and try to innovate. Let me give you another example about China. About 20 years ago, I would say it was impossible to think that Chinese are ever going to pay for a game. Like everything is just piracy. I still remember over there, like the first experience I ever had was actually on a bootleg of a Russian bootleg called the Xiaobamao. So the question over there was, how are you ever going to make money with content in China because no one pays for that? Well, that market condition pushed the Chinese studio to figure out their own business model, and this is why all the modern free to play or pay to win are actually mimicking the Chinese free to play and pay to win. So the question goes for, what about India? What about even Russia, for example, right? I think I read a piece of news where Russia officially have allowed piracy. I don't know if it's fake news or not, but if that is the case, then the question for me is, okay, what is that condition going to push the studios or the publishers? How are they going to survive in that new condition? And that's in a way very exciting to us because this is where we see innovations.
Got it. And Hans, I know from a legal perspective, Leela's a little bit different. We've got like kind of, a US entity, but then that owns like an Indian entity. And when you think about kind of whether it's hybrid models like ours or legal considerations when it comes to IP for some of the studios building out internationally, what are some of those gotchas or things that people should look out for?
Yeah, let me just touch on Michael's
Okay.
point first of all,
Yep.
in terms of international, right? And it used to be that uh, the money, the tech, the know-how was in the U.S., right? And the rest of the world relied on the U.S. as a center for innovation and creativity. You see that with games, and you also see that with Hollywood. And that's not true anymore, right? The ecosystems around the world are developing in China, in Korea, in India, all around the world. So it doesn't matter. It just, what matters is that you have the talent, right? The technical expertise and the funding, right? And that's one of the interesting things that's happening around the world is that because there's been so much money in the system, not only just from the games industry, but just technology overall. And I think that's led to some very interesting ecosystems around the world. So in terms of legal perspective, it used to be that the money was centered in Silicon Valley, and not just in the U.S. but in Silicon Valley for the funding of tech companies. And you used to hear venture capitalists say, "I'm not investing in any company where I can't drive to," right? So because they didn't think it was worth the trip, and that's changed completely. Like right now, it's like people are flying. So venture capitalists are exhausted now because they're taking flights all around the world to find the talent, and that's they have to do that because the most successful companies are not just going to be in this radius. Having said that, there's something to be said about the sort of the synergy that happens in certain areas. And Silicon Valley has really figured that out. They've really had the critical mass of folks and the talent and the money is here, but it's happening around the world as well. So just in terms of the legal aspect of it, that's the other thing that we're seeing, right? The money and the tech that's here is also seeing the talent abroad. And so you're seeing a lot of subsidiaries being set up to to uh, to actually build the games, to do the technology for the artwork. One of the things that we've seen is that there's a real shortage of talent, right? Professionals at all levels, and it's A to Z in a game company, uh, in even in the legal industry, right? To get the support for all these deals, and what's happening now is that people are looking abroad to fill those gaps, and again, it's the circle that I think is creating ecosystems around the world, and it's just going to be great for entrepreneurialism.
Right. And then in terms of any, do you have any thoughts in terms of some of the legal complications from having like more of a hybrid model like we have? Any advice you would give from a legal perspective if you were
Yeah, well,
trying to?
it's a challenge to man because the games industry really is about people, right? And managing people and managing the output and getting them all collaborating on this wonderful creative effort. And to get everyone on the same page across time zones, across languages, across cultures, I think it's the biggest challenge. Um, uh, And but so that's the biggest challenge right now.
Okay. And maybe before moving on, so like Michael, you had mentioned that maybe you are not as much of a fan in terms of the X Riot, X Blizzard type of model, but is there an ideal startup profile or gaming startup profile that you look for specifically?
I would nuance that. I would say that I don't necessarily think that being an ex-Blizzard and ex-Riot makes automatically you a really good startup entrepreneur.
Right.
That is the nuance. I think depends on what you do, but let's focus on studios. Jeff Minter mentioned one day in one of his conferences, he said that the most crucial and the most important skill you can ever learn in this industry is to ship something. It's so damn hard to ship any game. So one thing we particularly look at when we look at the founders, and we mentioned seed, for example, before, and when we look at the seed, we want to understand what have you done in that game you mentioned that you have done. Have you really contributed to shipping that game? That is a very important factor. Then what we also like to look at is, why is your idea good? We have this notion, this jargon almost of a category creator, meaning that do we believe that if your game is successful, if all the planets are aligned, your game is suddenly going to create a new category or change the category, right? Why that is important to us is because if you think about this, the video game is such a competitive, environment. There are so many good games, especially today. I checked my Steam game list. There are so many games I bought last month that I haven't even tried, right? It's so hard. So the best way for you to be successful as a studio is if you can create a game that everybody talks about, even if they don't play, but everybody talks about. And usually it's because you just changed the category or you create a new category. So that is something we look at. And then the third point that we look at is from, I would say, the more technical standpoint. Do you have the ability to actually build it? If it's a modern video game, especially online modern video game, you realize so much on the back end. So one thing we want to understand is, okay, what are your plans? Can you even run it? Do you understand the cost? Do you have a good understanding of your unit economy? It's good that you tell me you can run, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people concurrently. Okay, good. Are you going to make money? Right. So these are also the question we ask ourselves. And then that is more specific to the studio. And then you have all the, I would say, standard question you ask any founder in any startup company. So I think these are more generic. And probably if you want to have a good understanding, just look at the question of Y Combinator would ask. We kind of ask the same.
Jasper, what's an ideal startup that reaches out to you?
Oh God, that's a tough one. So I think in many traditional VCs always ask me, what do you look for in a game studio, and how can I assess a game studio? I think it's pretty similar to a traditional tech company in the broad strokes. To keep the response as broad as the question is. You're looking at people who are incredibly hungry, who have this bug to create, who want to change the status quo, who are, maybe more like a Formula One car instead of a sedan, who, really want to change something. They have this inner urge. They have a sense of speed. And they have an ability to inspire other people, and that includes hires, that includes players, that includes investors as well. And they're having an ability to also be self-reflected enough to know where they are weak. They get advice from other people where they think it can be helpful. They manage to put together a winning team. And controversially, it's not really success defining criteria if you have a lot of industry track record, subject matter expertise, or you're a solo versus multi-person founder in the broad venture ecosystem. But I would say when it comes to making AAA type of games products, it is very much advisable to have made games before. If you're in more metrics-driven, lower touch environments like mobile casual or something, I think if you're just very strong analytically, you can get away with much less. But if you're swinging for a AAA product, like the X-Ride or X-Blizzard folks usually tend to go for, that is, maybe PC first or other platforms, it is very hard, as Michael said, to make a game, even more so if you haven't shipped a game before. So, if you're building a studio in that space, I would, definitely look for some track record in building games, and not just having the Riot or Blizzard logo on your CV, but having made an influential contribution to some key element of a potentially industry-defining game.
All
I
right,
don't
cool.
envy you guys at all. I don't envy the that's a really, really tough job to find those folks. I mean, to identify the talent and figure out who's going to execute and who's not, and whether they're going to actually make a game that's going to hit, especially in this competitive environment.
Can I add one last thing? Over the years, having the opportunity, the enormous opportunity to meet great entrepreneurs, I think there's something in common. They're organized, they're focused, they're consistent. So when we talk to teams, especially the founding team, one thing we really try hard is to diagnose if they have these traits. Are they organized? Are they focused? Are they consistent? I believe that if you have these three traits, it will at least give you a higher chance to succeed in your mission.
Got it.
In terms of your maybe I could ask this question to the investors. In terms of your investment philosophy, do you find you have to spread your chips out a lot because you just not, it's a hits driven business, right? So, and this is why I said I don't envy you guys, because that one hit is going to pay for all of those other investments that fail. And it's really finding that hit, right? Finding that one diamond that's in the rough, and just recognize and accept that you're going to fail on a lot of your investments.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, and that's, I'm sometimes sad about this. The venture return math works in the power law distribution. So 1, 2, 3 investments make the majority of your returns in the fund. And that means the games you have to swing for as a venture investor are, these category defining companies that Michael referred to earlier. And there are so many great, talented teams out there who build great games, who innovate a specific niche genre and who deliver something stunning for a specific audience, but they do not have the venture scale. And there, quite frankly, I always talk to game studios and ask them about their ambitions, their plans, how they want to go about it. And for some of these guys, it's better to stay private, to own 100% of their company, maybe go a publisher route, maybe have a strong, profitable first game, 2, 3, maybe do some co-development even to fund the operation and development of the main game they want to ship. And then, maybe they even have a premium price tag on their game. They stay in beta or early access for a long time and try to transition to live ops from there. They try to stay fairly nimble, iterate and ship new games. But yeah, for every one team we say yes to, we have to say no to 99 teams, and that includes many very strong, passionate, driven teams that fit all of the criteria we mentioned earlier.
Okay. Yeah, there are so many, especially in content. There are so many times I told them I will be a consumer, I will be a player, but I would not be an investor.
All right, I thought
Joseph, you passed the test.
Got lucky, despite not knowing anything about fundraising. And that's what I want to go into next, because I wanted to talk about the fundraising process specifically. I think this is an area where I clearly didn't know what I was doing, but somehow made it. So that's great. But I wanted to dig into some of the details. And guys, you know me, feel free to call me out. Say, yeah, you screwed up here. I know I screwed up. But I thought we could start maybe with like the fundraising amount. And I think, Jasper, early on from the seed, I think we had talked about like the typical process looks like you raise enough money for about 18 months of runway, just like the heuristics of it, right? And then you try to raise your next round, when you have 6 months of runway left. Now, we started fundraising when we had, of our 2.8 million, we still had like over 2 million in the bank. So it was like earlier. And I think when we had originally started talking, it was like, well, maybe we'll, I think the conversation started because I was talking to another friend of mine, Eden Chen, and just thought raising money would be good. And then we saw some potential other opportunities like cross-platform and other ways we could potentially spend the money. So that was what kicked off the conversation. And then the initial conversation was about raising a little bit of money, like 1.5, 2 million. And then we kind of like, we're looking around, we saw these other guys raising a lot more money. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe we should go up to 7. And then it's like, oh, what, not 7, 10. And then we even had to like, because of Hans, to your point about the amount of money out there, right? Like some of the guys that invested in us typically would never write a check that small. And I'm not sure how happy they were, but like, we had to get them from like 5 to 1 or, things like that. So maybe Jasper, Michael, could you talk about the current like what should the fundraising strategy be for Series A? Now, I think we just kind of did it ad hoc and, I mean, I just feel very fortunate that everything worked out the way that it did, but how should people be thinking about when and how much money to raise Series A versus whatever? And I don't know, Jasper, you want to start?
Sure. I think the crucial piece in your case from your seed round and what we had planned back then is that you expanded the vision and the scope in 2 or 3 areas, which kind of requires a little bit more capital as well. That's so right. The initial thinking was, hey, do we potentially just get a little bit more dry powder to be dangerous with, so we can build this out, get through soft launch, and have a good set up there to then raise a Series A. But then kind of listening a little bit to the market and after some conversations, you have put together a strong team. You've put together a first prototype that looks great. You have a very exciting vision that is very in the zeitgeist. And from there, we were not really Series A ready, it felt like back then. So we said like, hey, let's test out the market. Let's call it pre-Series A. This is an opportunistic round. We're expanding the scope, but we want to put gas on the fire and have a meaningful quantum to be really dangerous with. And then talking to investors, I think we put together a nice list of strong potential leads who could take a solid step there, including VCs and publishers who invest. And I think within 2 or 3 weeks, you had your first term sheet. So, that's not something that's trivial either. So you managed to do a good job presenting everything well and inspiring investors like you inspired the team members before. And from there, we always had the optionality to raise a little bit more. You had the conversations open with a few interested parties. Some came around then, and that's usually an interesting dynamic. Some founders go around the blocks who have tons of co-investor interest almost for the entirety of the round, perhaps, but they struggle to find a lead. Finding a lead is probably the trickier piece, which you managed to do first, while having some angels and so forth committed already. But with a lead, I think then the final dominoes that start to fall, people start to get perhaps a little bit of FOMO. They see, there's real merit to this, and they want to get in and get in early and want to be a part of this. So even though you had to push some people around on their preferred allocation, I think having that lead locked in certainly helped a lot there to get this going.
Michael, what do you think? And like, how should someone come up with a specific number, whether it's 7 or 10 or 15 or whatever? How does that number generally get decided? Because we just kind of pulled numbers out of buttocks, basically. So
think about this as almost as a product manager. My recommendation is to know exactly what you want to do. Don't think about the money yet. I know it's hard, but think about what you want to achieve. Have a list of your milestone that you want for the next few quarters. And then ask yourself, can you achieve that with what you have today? If you cannot, why? And once you have established the list of the reasons that are preventing you from achieving your tasks, then you ask yourself, if I had money or more cash, can I buy these solutions? That should be the way to think, I believe, from the entrepreneur side. The the reason I mentioned product manager is because in product management, there's a jargon called feature creep that basically destroys every single product. And what I see very often from entrepreneurs, especially in early stage, is you have this kind of feature creep while they're fundraising. And as you mentioned, usually they start with, we need to deliver that. I think we're a little bit short on runway. So let's raise maybe like a bridge loan, like a 500K. We do this and then we go to this massive Series A. And that is the initial story. And then they test the market. And they're like, oh my gosh, everybody wants to listen to me. It's incredible. Everybody is flattening my ego. I feel so good. Let me raise more money. Now the 500K become, what if I can raise $1 million? And that is, I think I can raise $2 million. I think I can raise $3 million. See where I'm going? Now you focus on the wrong thing. You focus on the capital. You focus on cash, and you forgot about your real goal, which is building something. I also want to remind you and remind everyone who is listening here that raising money is the most expensive way to access capital. You are literally giving away or selling a part of a company. That is so expensive. So it should not be trivial. When you think about, oh, I'm going to raise $3, $4, $5 million, that's not free money. You're selling part of a company for that. Now, the other thing to think about that is on the dilution part, right? You don't want to be overly diluted if you raise more money. So the only thing you can do now is raise the price, right? You don't want to give 50% of a company just because you raised $5 million. So you're going to price that. So your dilution keeps it low. The problem with that now is it puts a lot of pressure on you because let me remind you, VCs, investors make money when your company exits. So if you have a post-money of $50 million valuation, for example, what it really means is for us to make money, you have to sell or exit at probably 500. How many $500 million company do you know? Right? Not that many. So that puts a lot of pressure on you. Now you have to consider, okay, post-Series A is where you also start to have a real board. And you have to report to a board every quarter now. You have to have a conversation. Do you want to have that pressure on you? Do you want to have all these people asking you, basically what they're really asking you, are you sure you can manage to create $1 billion company? That's a huge pressure, right? So I think these are the considerations that a lot of early stage companies are not taking into account.
Yeah. I think you raised some really good points, Michael. I would say that, like in our case, I think that part of the consideration, especially from the 7 to 10, was not only like what can we do, but so for example, like the last investors coming in were Sequoia India and Krafton. And so I think the other consideration that we had been thinking about is, okay, we're building out in India. Recruiting is absolutely critical for us, and we've had problems over the last year recruiting very strongly. Who could help us recruit, build connections in India? And so that was part of the consideration, in as well as like the money, and also part of the consideration of trying to get those guys in. But I do think that you raise a really good point in terms of all the considerations, in terms of dilution, in terms of what you'll have to eventually wind up getting to, versus on the flip side for us, it's just like, okay, we don't want to take the dilution, but at the same time, ultimately, we want to do everything we can to increase our chances of success. So, yeah, I do think it's like a difficult problem coming up with the exact right number, and also the number of investors. And I will say this, that it was controversial, right? Like in terms of bringing on the last two investors, like it was not. It was not. It was a bit of discussion and debate about whether we should even do it or not, for sure. And then ultimately, I think for us, again, it was just like, okay, recruiting, potential synergy, collaboration. Let's just try to get it done.
I would add
So
one
let me
thing.
jump in here. You're being too modest. You're an MBA, right? So you know these trajectories. Come on. All right. you know that there's different types of trajectories with the amount of money that you have, right?
Mhm.
So you could run a small company with the amount of your seed capital, make it last, run frugally, try to develop something, be scrappy. And sometimes that is the formula for success, right? Like that forces you to be disciplined. I get that, right? But I think you also realize that there was probably a different trajectory that you could take, and this may go back to Jasper's point. When you find a team that's developed the talent, and when you have the ideas on paper that look fantastic, you can't let money get in the way. You can't. You've got to go for it, right? The VCs are in there to change the world, right? To make this huge company, right? To be the success, right? They don't want a 2x multiple, right? We're looking for something big, and I think they recognize in you, Joseph, and this is I think applicable to anybody who's looking for money. They look for strong leadership, someone who's got a vision, someone who's got something that can really scale. And I think the money just being there and people throwing money at you is because they recognize that this has a real opportunity to scale. This could be a big hit.
I will. I want to touch upon a point that Joe you mentioned about this idea of smart money. Every single investor, I think, at least in the Silicon Valley, at some point will tell you that they have more than cash and they will have this smart money. Um, what, I'm not going to discuss whether that is true or not, but let's consider that actually they all have smart money, right? They can all offer so much more than cash. The one thing that you have to consider is, do you even have time for them to, help you? For me, your relationship with VCs is almost like with vendors. And if you ever work with vendors, you know that you probably want to have a sort of account manager, because if you don't tell them what you want, it will be very hard for them to help you. So as you take more and more investors, one thing you have to consider is, do you even have time to communicate with all of them so they know exactly what you want? When you mentioned hiring, for example, sure, we all know that hiring is really, really hard. Not just in India, by the way, everywhere is really, really hard.
Yeah.
And then you find this investor who says, oh, I'm very well implemented in India, I can help you with. And you're like, oh, good. Okay, what does it mean exactly? On the day-to-day basis, what does it mean? Because if you truly want this person to help you, what you really have to do is almost have a dedicated account manager communicate with that person on a daily or maybe a weekly basis to review all the pipeline that this person have helped you to create, and then almost like a data scientist label that and tell, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, so the person can also tune that and only send you the good ones, right? And that is a really, really, really expensive task to do. Do you even have the bandwidth to do that with that investor? So I think this is also something that a lot of early stage founders don't necessarily think about.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that, Michael. And I would say that for us, I think Sequoia India and so there's a notion of smart money. Actually, I don't even care about that. just to be clear. So Sequoia India has a long history in India and has certain relationships that they've already helped us out with. But I will say, like, Craft On, okay, PUBG just happens to be the biggest game in India. I've literally had 3 offers flip after the news came out. And it's like the Craft on PUBG brand name was very valuable. And so we literally, like, one offer flipped yesterday and we decided to accept that offer. But and then, like, even in Discord, so they're like, oh, Craft On's investing in Leela. Wow. I wonder what they're doing. So, like, that brand and kind of like the validation from having a company like that seems to be having an impact in India. So I would say, like, that was the other kind of good effect of bringing those guys on board with us. Okay, maybe we could also talk about and maybe before jumping into mistakes, because I know I made a lot, but one other thing that I thought might be interesting to talk about is in terms of, like, raising the Series A, has to do with how you structure the financing in terms of, like, post-money valuation versus pre-money valuation. And, like, we decided to go for a post-money because we weren't sure if we wanted to raise additional capital we didn't want there to be like a conflict of interest where, you know, there would be potential issues where, you know, because we're raising additional capital, then the valuation changes. The valuation changes, or the amount of dilution changes. But then later on, I think after we got some additional investors on, then we kind of flipped again. But in terms of like how you structure it, and by the way, and the reason we went with a post money valuation in terms of this last round, at least initially, was based upon a lot of feedback from a friendly venture capitalist who strongly recommended that approach. But I don't know, Jasper, Michael, if you have any thoughts in terms of whether you should go like post or pre, and kind of some of the dynamics behind choosing one or the other.
I think with the post money valuation, everybody is very clear on, you know, what you get. The new investor sets the ticket he wants to write. The post money valuation, if you want to raise more, the dilution kind of comes from the team. So it really shifts the question of, do you want to take on more dilution and raise more capital at this point in time a bit into your yard. But I would say, you know, more often than not, we still see pre-money valuations for priced rounds. Most of the time, you set the total investment amount in place, where, you know, you raise up to X amount, and the lead investor writes X amount out of that. But you know, both models work. It's not that big of a difference, but the post money just gives everybody a little bit more clarity, I would say.
I would say that at least at Galaxy it doesn't really make any difference, because at the end of the day, we calculated your dilution on post. I think where it could make a difference is how you think about this the first time you look at the presentation. Pre-money is how much at least the entrepreneur believe their company is worth today. Post-money is more like a projection, almost like a pro forma. I think in a way it's a cleaner for investors to look at pre-money, because this is how we assess the situation as it is today. But as Jasper said, it's easier and clearer to talk in post-money.
Hans, what are you seeing more of, pre-post? And
Okay,
do you
this
have any
drives me
legal
nuts. I'm
recommendations?
sorry. I go crazy with this. As I represent both sides. So to be fair, right, I represent venture capitalists and I represent companies, but I mostly represent companies and entrepreneurs, and it's definitely more fun. Sorry, Jasper and Mike, it's more fun to represent the companies. But I will tell you this: is that a post-money valuation concept is investor friendly. Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me, right? Pre-money valuation is what your company is worth. If you tack on more cash, your company is worth more. Post-money valuation makes no sense to me. So that's just my 2 cents, right? So if you're worth, say, $20 million, right, and you get 10 million cash, okay, your post-money is 30. So if you're worth 20 million and you raise 15 million cash, is your post money valuation now lower, even though you have more cash? It makes no sense. I'm sorry. And I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace in terms of what that means. And partly this is due to also the Y Combinator safes, right? Y Combinator, which is a very influential accelerator. It's the most influential and powerful accelerator. They switched their safe, which is their basically their seed financing instrument, from a pre-money safe to a post-money safe. And I think entrepreneurs really need to study what that means, right? When you switch to a post-money safe, the more money you raise, you're effectively diluting only the founders, right? The investors get their percentage because they get a locked-in post-money valuation, and so the company, even if they raise millions and millions of dollars, it's only squeezing the common, it's only squeezing the founders. So that's something that really that people have to be careful about in terms of when they actually raise money, is that they understand the math behind what that means.
Okay. Maybe we could talk about some of the mistakes I made. And Michael, maybe starting with you, because I know one of the things that I screwed up on is just better communication with you guys. But can you talk about like the amount of like, let's say you're going from your seed to your Series A, what should the communication flow be like? And again, apologies for screwing up the communication with you guys.
Um, I would say this because it will help to maybe frame the conversation. Investors have two emotions: greed and fear. When we, court you, when we really want to invest in you, we have that greed factor going like nuts. And then we send you a check, and then now, boom, fear kicks in, and we have a lot of doubts. Did we make a mistake? Was it too expensive? This Joe guy, is he really serious? Oh my God, he spends so much time on his podcast. Is he actually building something? Like, but I mean, Jasper, let me know. But at least I'm very transparent here. These are the questions we ask ourselves. And then by the way, a week when you fear something is very long. So you spend a week and nothing, and a month nothing, a quarter nothing, and then you receive the first email, and you have this: we have a hiring problem, and we're like, that doesn't sound good. And then we go back and read our investment memo that we presented to our investment committee, where we literally wrote that one of the qualities of the team, and this is our thesis, is that they're really good at hiring people. And we are sure that Joe, because he's a celebrity, will have an easy time hiring people. And also they're going to India, so they're going to hire people at a significant lower cost. And so they're going to build, everything is going to be magical. And we read that, we're like, we are so full of shit. This is quite literally the opposite that's happening right now. So are we really bad investors? Should we all quit? And then we have all this doubt that creates even more fear, right? So the reason I'm exposing this is not for you to, oh, poor investor. No. I'm not trying to do this. I'm just trying to tell you how we behave, what we feel, so you know what you can do here. So
Please.
one thing is just having this, I would say, not constant communication. You don't want to babysit us, but I would say anticipation and stability. Nothing should come up as a surprise. A good board meeting, I tell a lot of the company I'm board on, is the board meeting should be almost boring. Like everybody already know what to expect. You don't have any surprises like boom, voila. Anticipation is very, very important. You want especially your board members to come to the board with a lot of ideas, with a lot of conversation to already have. And in our case, with you at least, I think it's becoming better. But I would say in the early days, especially in the first 2 or 3 emails we received from yours, like it was almost a surprise all the time, and we're like having this shock, saying, not going too well. What is he talking about? I also think that it's very important to consider that you have the people who are close to you, for example, your board members, and then you have your minority investors, right? And a lot of time, what I see is founders are really good with their their lead investor, but not so good with our minority investors. So the minority investor have actually even less information about you guys. So it's even more shock, even more surprise, and that's sometimes really hard to take. And then finally, when we talk about your fundraising, to be honest with you, we weren't expecting you to do a fundraising. We weren't expecting that number. When I heard about how much you were raising, I'm like, that sounds really high. And like, what's going on here? Are they going nuts? And we had a lot of internal conversation, and everybody, we all like you a lot. So we basically have 2 teams: the people like the cynical, like me, are like, I think Joe is smoking something, and then we have other people who are much nicer and trying to root for you. Now he knows exactly what he's doing. But the truth is, none of us have actually proof of what we're talking about, because we don't have enough information about this fundraising, and more importantly, the justification of why that size. So I think these are high level, some of the things that could be smoother next time. Yeah, Jasper, I leave the mic to you now.
Yeah, I think the point you made on potentially communicating closer with your lead from the seat is probably valid here. because to me, kind of Joe has very, very active comms, and I think his monthly reporting is probably top notch across our portfolio. I know barely any founder who's as process driven as Joe, and always flips everything. And he's not shy to communicate his challenges very openly to his investors, and I think that's a good piece. But yeah, there might be something to it to more proactively communicate the challenges to the broader investor base, perhaps. So as Michael mentioned earlier, to get every investor to really work for you. That's also the first thing we said when we set up our initial board meeting, right? This is not, especially at seed and Series A and whatnot, board meetings are not meant for governance or something like that. They're meant for the investors to get context, how they can best help you, and how you can maybe even get clarity and confidence in how you want to go about the key challenges you're facing at a certain point in time. And we had many phone calls around raise amount, how to go about it. So I kind of felt up to date on that. And I had the background on why you are, why we are changing things in a certain direction, but can certainly see that others might be taken a bit with surprise there.
To give you a concrete example, in several emails we received from Giorgio, you mentioned about you want your investors to help you to hire people. I'm sorry, that's kind of useless. It's like saying that, oh, I'm building a company, help. Sure, what exactly? Let me tell you an example of a good founder. We have many good founders who are really, really good at using their investors. One of them, literally a month ago, reached out to me and said, Michael, I went to look at your LinkedIn, and you know this guy, and made me a list. Can you make an intro? And by the way, what he did later is even wrote a paragraph telling me, send that paragraph in your intro. This is how I describe my company. That is way more useful. Basically, my point here is help me to help you, right? Help me to help you. When I think another good example is another founder reached out to me recently about thinking about, I think, multiplayer anti-bot or some sort of this kind of product. And instead of asking me a very broad question like, Michael, who is the best on the market, literally asked me a very actionable question like, these are the three we're talking to. What do you think? Is there any good? What are the prices? And is there anyone that I'm missing that I should talk to? Right? That's just more actionable. It's easier for me to really help. So from a communication standpoint, that's a tip.
Got it.
I think if I can briefly jump in there, I think there's really a mix here. Galaxy, like Bitcraft, we're both very active as lead investors usually, and we both like to roll up our sleeves and help founders. So everything that Michael mentioned, I feel like Joe did with me, even when it comes to what netcode, what accounting firm. Joe always reach out. We do have any recommendations? We're looking at this, and that, and then referring to some people in our network can help answer perhaps, or we might have the answer in our back pocket. So I felt like with us that piece of communication happened fairly actively, but I can totally see that you guys, as you also usually play a very active role, would probably expect that to happen.
Right. But yeah, being as specific as possible and trying to
Yeah.
tee it up for you guys. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe we could also talk about the fundraising process itself. And I would say that's something that I totally screwed up. I remember Hans was one time we were on the phone, you were like, get me the fuck off this email thread. But anyway, so I think part of the mistake that I made, well, one is just I didn't spend a lot of time, but at the same time, a lot of investment advice that I got was don't spend too much time fundraising, and I did it. But I actually think that was a mistake because I was so clueless on the process. And during the seed, it's just like, okay, pitch a few companies, and then we pick a investor, and then we're done. And I literally spent I counted up my hours, less than 20 hours total. This includes prep and everything for seed. Okay. Series A was a lot more time, but I mean, I think on a relative basis, I mean, I know entrepreneurs who've talked to 100 investors, but still, like let's say we talked to this time around 15 or 20, but I feel like I was more lucky than good that, raising money and having enough capital for a company is a critical CEO function. And I kind of screwed that up. And then now, after the seed, you have a board. Like one of the mistakes I made, Hans, is, as you pointed out correctly, is like bringing stuff to the board and things like that. But like, could you talk about from seed to Series A? What should that process look like? Having a defined process that you communicate out to potential investors and things like that. What should a good process, not my process, because I just got lucky, but like, what should a good process look like? And I'll open up for anyone to kind of jump in here on that. And Hans, feel free to like call me out specifically on the 100 mistakes I made.
Let me just say one thing. So,
Uh-huh.
and Michael had mentioned this earlier, is that these board meetings, right? It should be boring. Like it's no surprise, right? You're in active communication with your lead investors to say we are raising a Series A, and this is when we're going to do it. Instead, they know months in advance when you're doing it, how much you're doing it for, how it tracks into your milestone, your business plan, your long-term picture, and that discussion happens over months, right? It doesn't just sort of come out of nowhere where you're like, oh, let's flip the switch and hand it to the lawyer, or just do these presentations and hand it to the lawyer. So I think you were going about this a little bit too flip, right? And this is part of what's endearing about you. You're so passionate about your company and your team and your game, and obviously that's the most important thing. Like, there's no doubt about it, because people don't want you to take the ball, your eyes off that ball, right? That's the most important thing. But on the other hand, raising money is something that you can manage, right? And I think it felt like it wasn't managed in terms of the communications with your stakeholders. Yeah. And when I heard that, I was like, wait, like, okay. And then it felt to me as a lawyer, and I'm just gonna be honest, that you were like, I'm just flipping the switch, right? Right. And I don't have time for this, right? I've got my focus on something else. Let me just hand this off. Let me just do a presentation, flip a switch, and money pours in, right? And that's kind of not how most companies do it.
Yeah.
There's this notion in some VCs, and we are one of them, of runway minus 5 months. The reason we do that exercise in our investment memo, for example, we do that all the time, is usually it takes about that amount of time for your fundraising. There's a company in our portfolio that is closing their fundraising very, very well, and it took them 2 weeks to go through their entire meeting list, and it took about a month to close it, right? To get term sheets, select one, get all the followers, and booms, long form, etc., etc. So it's about a month. But what a lot of people don't know is it took actually almost 2 months to prepare for that. So yes, fundraising, but we have to be very, very, I would say, precise about the definition. If we talk about fundraising as the act of meeting people, meeting investors, talking to them, getting term sheets signed, get the followers, long form, etc., yeah, that probably you want to keep it a month. You don't want to more than that. But in order to do that so smoothly in a month, you need a lot of preparation. And I think in your case, this is what was missing. When you start your fundraising, especially for Series A, seed is a little bit different. I have to admit, seed is a little bit different. But for your Series A, if you've done your job correctly, when you go to announce your fundraising at the board meeting, at the board level, probably your lead investor already have a kind of idea of what you are going to do, because you discuss with them, and you have a very, very specific plan. okay, we are starting fundraising on that date. It's going to take 2 weeks to talk to all these investors. And this is my complete list of investors. We are not going to creep, by the way. I am not going to randomly, talk to more investors just because, right? This is the amount of money we are going to raise, and this is the target price that we are going to raise for. If we cannot hit that target, this is the range. If we cannot hit the range, this is the scenario B, right? Everything is very mechanical. Which is not necessarily what we have seen for your fundraising.
Absolutely not. I will absolutely agree with you guys. I totally screwed that up. Now, looking back, I'm kind of glad I did it that way because I literally, so I talked to a number of gaming CEOs. I believe I have spent the least amount of time on fundraising than anyone in the industry. But sometimes better lucky than good, and I'm glad like things worked out. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. I do know other gaming CEOs who have done that prep, like 2 to 3 months of prep, getting the presentation right, refining their story. They set out like a 2-week block of time, took like 30 meetings a week, and then it was very, to your point, mechanical. Jasper, do you have any thoughts in terms of how that process should look like? Do you agree with Michael?
I would say, firstly, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. So there is probably some elements that make you more likely to be lucky here. In your case, you had 2 million of your 2.8 million still in the bank when you went out. It was a bit of an opportunistic thing. We were a little bit reactive to the market. So it was a bit of a special situation also how we went about discussing expanding the round, then from 7 to 8, then to 10. I think there is some beauty to being reactive sometimes, but it's not the standard playbook I would recommend to everybody. I think we made a tight list, spoke to folks, and we deliberately kept the list tight to high likelihood, high value add partners. And I think if we had Sequoia and Krafton signed up from the get-go, getting term sheets and getting lead investor interest rallied up could have been more appealing. So perhaps having broader conversations there, even with people who can not only be leads, is something we could have done from the start, or founders can do throughout the year without defocusing too much on building their product. But with strong parties that could be good pieces to the puzzle, keeping them in the loop and up to speed and ready to go when something happens can be something. But it's also a function of us just going out somewhat spontaneously for a race, even though we had so much runway still ahead of us. And we frankly didn't feel like we were Series A ready, right? We called it a pre-Series A. We thought about potentially even doing a convertible just as a bridge to get a little bit more to build the 2-3 extra pieces to the vision that we identified along the way. So it's an unorthodox one. Could we have done some things better? Probably, but it worked out.
Well, I would say, I mean, that's actually an interesting part of this, right? Is the markets are good. There's a lot of money out there. It's hot. And this is something Joseph and I talked about, that you don't know when the economy is going to shift. And so I think that worked out brilliantly for you. And not only that, you got oversubscribed. So it's a testament to what you've built and to you. So and Jasper, you were saying, yeah, luck meets preparation, right? I mean, it's a big part of that. And I think Joseph, part of you also knew that, right? Subconsciously, right? That this was going to work out. So I want to totally, I'm trying to be kind to you because
it's okay. You don't need to be.
Yeah. You should have read the documents more, and you should have had more communication, obviously.
I will say this. There was a point in time during the initial fundraising process where, Paul and I were like, we have no idea how we're going to raise this money. But, one thing I said is like, Paul, I will say this, even when we were early, I was like, I think we're going to get 10 and we're going to manifest it. And it somehow worked out. So yeah, in the back of my mind, I thought maybe it would happen. And that 10 was actually the number I had in my mind. But that was and then just things just kind of played out. So Yeah.
I will say
Anyway,
this too, is that with my clients, right, the more impressive founders, they wave their hand, money comes in, right? And that's what you'll see with experienced teams,
it
with
was
people with
not that
track
easy
record.
for us, just to be clear. It was like Series A, like seed was relatively kind of easy, I want to say, but Series A was definitely, and again, I don't want to take away from those guys, like the real entrepreneurs who have to talk to 100 investors, right? Like hats off to those guys, but I felt like Series A was definitely much harder than seed.
The the one thing that is important is, by the way, getting lucky is awesome. The VC investment game is the game of exceptions. As you mentioned, we invest in a bunch of companies, and maybe one of them are going to be so exceptionally good that is going to pay for all the failures. That's by definition exceptional. And the only people who can win in this game from the founder standpoint are the exceptional people. And you are exceptionally good at that. And you have exceptional skills, and maybe raising money so easily and getting so lucky is what makes you exceptional. But I think it's also very important to be humble, especially when your company grows, because luck is so damn important at early stage, becomes less and less important as your company grows. When your company starts to grow, when you start to scale, which is another verb that VC really like, what is important to understand is your company becomes more and more mechanical, becomes more and more like a system. So if you raise money so easily, quote unquote, in seed, and easier, comparatively still very easy
I'll call it difficult. I'll call it difficult for me.
Yeah, I would say difficult at A. You should expect your Series B to be much more difficult, and you should not think that, oh, I got away twice, so I will get away a third time. That's
Right.
really not the right mentality.
Yeah. No, and by the way, to be absolutely clear, if I were to I'm glad things worked out the way they did, but not spending enough time, not preparing was a mistake. Absolutely a mistake. So in the interest of time, I know we're running a bit long here, but maybe one last question to you guys would be, what is like the biggest fundraising Series A mistake that you have seen, and what would be one bit of advice that you give to entrepreneurs out there? Maybe starting with you, Jasper.
The biggest mistake, I think, broadly, it is just a natural part of the equation that every subsequent round becomes increasingly harder. A portion of the seed investments make it to Series A, a portion of Series A make it to Series B. I would say, preparation, running a structured, organized process, not creating that momentum and excitement across investors, things dabbling, things not closing, is probably the biggest mistake. And you increase your chances of getting that first term sheet. This is usually when others are like, oh, wait, there's something happening here. We really need to make a decision. And before it's like, oh, yeah, let's have a conversation. We'll look a little bit more. Unless, you have really the types of founders that Hans mentioned that wave their hand and money comes in. You really want to have a very structured process. You want to make sure you get your first 1, 2, 3 term sheets in, create that momentum, and get ready to close. And it also helps you get a good deal, and maybe a little less dilution than you would even take in a less organized process.
Michael?
I would say raising at a much higher price than what it is, or raising much more money than what you actually want or need. The truth about fundraising is, if you look at from an exit standpoint and you look back, the rounds kind of average out. So if you raise a massive Series A, that puts a lot of pressure on your Series B. We have seen over the years companies that have raised massive amount of money early on, and that made their fundraising more difficult later on, because investors don't want to get diluted. They want quadruple the next one. So that is one of the reasons. The second reason is, when you raise a lot of money, you have to mentally have this shift. There's a huge difference between running, I would say, a early stage startup, especially in the Silicon Valley, versus running a company that's meant to be a global company now. And sometimes you're forced to. When you raise a lot of money that forces you to act like a global company already. And if you're not ready, that's going to cause a lot of problems.
Hans?
Just following up on Mike's point, I think the problem enters into when the founders don't have discipline with the money, right? They raise a big round and then they think big and they're not humble, right? But money in of itself, I don't think is a problem. It's just maintaining the discipline, right? And I think in my discussions with Joseph, it's, hey, like there could be nuclear winter coming, right? So it'd be nice to have some dry powder, but don't lose your discipline. So that's but in terms of mistakes that we see, I think understanding what you have in terms of whether this can be attractive to certain investors, doing your homework up front in terms of who to approach for your Series A, and really finding the right fit in terms of who the investor is. There are a lot of investors, a lot of people who say they can help you, but it's so critical, especially these days, that you build a team, and your team includes your board members and your investors who can help you get to the next stage. Again, the market's so competitive that every little advantage you can get, whether it be like your connections through Sequoia India or through Krafton or through any other of your investors, right, is important, and that could be the difference to get to the next stage. So and I think you did wonderfully, right, in terms of what you've assembled. So kudos to you.
Yeah,
whether it was luck or not, I don't know. But.
Yeah, I do feel very fortunate. For anyone out there, these guys are great. Jasper and Michael are top notch. So absolutely want to give a shout out to these guys. And just to wrap it up then, maybe each of you, if you want to talk a little bit more about your respective companies and how, if people are interested in getting in touch with you, how they can get in touch with you. Jasper?
Sure. So at Bitcraft, we invest in game studios and platforms and technology in around games and interactive media. We basically invest across stages. We tend to be fairly active as lead investors. It is somewhat similar to Galaxy, what we're doing. So Joe definitely got probably two of the best ones around the table, I would probably say. We touched upon a few things, how we like to operate. We try to roll up our sleeves, work pretty close with our portfolio companies. And at Bitcraft, we have a portfolio of over 85 portfolio companies now. So there's a lot of magic that can happen between portfolio founders. There's a pretty strong network, and that also extends into our LP base. So what Hans mentioned, that the investors are part of the team of the company. For us, our LPs are part of the team, if you will. That reaches into the strategic networks across high net worth individuals who have been entrepreneurs before, strategic partners, and family offices and whatnot. We have a global scope, we have a global focus. We're just excited to back hungry entrepreneurs in the game space overall. And you can reach me at jasper@bitcraft.vc. And if you want to learn a little bit more, we post some insights pieces on our website, have our portfolio listed there. We're pretty approachable. Just feel free to reach out.
Michael?
Galaxy Interactive, we are a VC fund, and more specifically about gaming is we invest across the entire video game ecosystem, from content to publishing to marketing to tech to deep tech. The way we like to invest is we like to observe the ecosystem and ask ourselves, how do they all work together, and what are the categories that are being dismissed or that people really don't want to understand because they're really boring? And this is exactly where we want to invest next. From the relationship we build with our founders, we are stake agnostic. But to be honest, I checked last time, 47% of the deal we made last year were Series A. So we are still fairly early stage. We like to be very close to the founders. Every single deal we make is because we have high conviction. It's something that we really believe is going to be a massive company and we absolutely enjoy working with. Every single founder that I back have my phone number, all my phone numbers, and I tell them, look, If you even want to call me at 3 in the morning to yell, do it, because I know I know the solitude of being a founder sometimes. And maybe you just want to talk to someone. And of course, you can reach out to me or any of my folks if we can help you in any ways. For example, the thing that is very easy for investors to do, introduction. Investors love to do introduction, right? But in some cases, because of our own background, I've been in the Bay Area for more than a decade as more on the product side. If you want to have a conversation on product, that's also something I can have with you. And the final point I would say that where Galaxy we try to shine is to be early, try to bet on things that not necessarily people even agree with. We like to go to market that people don't necessarily think is good yet. We are actually currently expanding on the international market, as we mentioned before. And one thing we really want to do is to bring the top talent in other regions, even here to the USA.
Hans?
Yeah, if people want to reach me, I'm at Hans at mayfieldventurelaw.com. I'm affiliated with Mayfield Venture Law. I also act as GC for a number of early stage startups. Our focus at Mayfield is really incorporation through Series B. So I'm happy to help entrepreneurs. It's a real passion of mine to be helpful to entrepreneurs. And thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks so much for joining and giving us your insights. For the audience, we'll catch you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.